Our skies are full of mysteries. Unidentified flying objects secretly investigated by government agencies all over Europe for decades.
People are absolutely fascinated by this subject, and there are so many people out there who want to know the truth.
For the first time, we've collated sightings and reports from across an entire continent.
Here he comes from the south. He's coming toward us now.
The incident burned such an impact in my memory that I don't think I'll ever be able to forget it.
Some experts insist that many sightings have rational explanations.
Even the most careful UFO researcher can fall victim to a cleverly perpetrated hoax.
But a few continue to defy understanding.
This UFO incident was and remains unexplained.
Are these visitors from other worlds or natural phenomena? And do our European governments know more than they ever reveal to us? The answer may lie in the untold stories of the UFO files of Europe. Rendlesham, England, December the 26th, 1980. On a high-security US airbase, bizarre events are unfolding. An unknown object caught on radar, mysterious lights in the forest, and the strange experience of 2 Air Force security guards.
Then all of a sudden, we came into a clearing, and there was a bright light, and the whole woods lit up.
When we hit the ground, we didn't know what we thought was going to be an explosion or something.
The Rendlesham Forest incident is one of the most mysterious of all UFO tales.
This is clearly Britain's most interesting and compelling UFO encounter.
Rendlesham has since become known as Britain's Roswell.
Now, 30 years on, more evidence brings the case to life once again. Air traffic controller Nigel Kerr reveals his account of an unknown object detected on radar that night.
I saw something. Bentwater told me they'd seen something. Then you think, what really happened there?
Bentwater's US military base. It's the early hours of the morning. Air Force security guards John Burroughs and Jim Peniston witness a strange light over the forest.
It almost looked like a Christmas light, like display of different colored lights.
Concerned it may be a crashing aircraft, they go to investigate.
We decided to open up the gate, drive down to the end of the road, and see if we could get a better idea of what we were dealing with. As we got into the woods, it seemed like we were having trouble gauging exactly where it was at first. And just when we thought we got close to it, sometimes it wasn't there. Then all of a sudden, we came into a clearing, and there was what appeared to be like a bright light, and the whole woods lit up at that point.
We hit the ground. We didn't know what we thought was going to be an explosion or something. At that point in time, it was no longer an aircraft crash. It was an unknown situation, possible security, hostile threat.
But their abnormal night was about to get stranger.
As I got back up, the light dissipated, and what appeared then was a triangular craft.
Jim claims he made notes about the bizarre experience.
I wrote down as many things as I could. I wrote down the size, and it was a black craft, shiny like glass, smooth. Then it started to power up with the lighting, and it lifted off the ground.
And whatever it was dimmed, started to go up into the trees and went out towards the coastline. Once we realized we lost complete contact with it, we called it in and we were told to return.
The truth of Jim and John's strange encounter has been hotly debated ever since. Nick Pope manned the Ministry of Defense UFO desk in the 1990s. He feels the professional backgrounds of the witnesses make the case difficult to dismiss.
With many UFO sightings, you can say, well, maybe it's a misidentification of something quite ordinary. But when highly trained Air Force security police personnel say, we encountered a landed UFO, either they're lying or hallucinating, or what they say happened did happen.
But others are less convinced. Inconsistencies exist between the witnesses' accounts. Jim is the only one claiming to have seen a landed craft. Investigative journalist Dave Clark believes there could be a more rational explanation.
When you try and reduce it to its basics, this is a group of American airmen late at night, over the Christmas holidays, reported seeing mysterious lights in a forest. Clearly, these airmen saw something that was extraordinary, that they couldn't explain. But a lot of UFO incidents, when they're investigated thoroughly, turn out to be quite ordinary objects seen in extraordinary circumstances.
Later that morning, Bentwater Security called in the police. Suffolk Constabulary logs record the request. A police constable heads to the site where the UFO purportedly landed. He finds only faint marks on the ground. With little evidence of a crime scene, the police take no action. But Jim and John were not the only witnesses to strange lights in the sky that night. At around 10 to 3 on the morning they entered the forest, reports were made across the southeast of England of a dazzling light in the sky. Nigel Henbest believes events in the cosmos could provide the explanation.
The first light that appeared in the sky over Rendlesham was undoubtedly a meteor. A lot of amateur astronomers from the British Astronomical Association, who are guys who go out looking at the sky every night, saw a bright shooting star crossing England at exactly that time. When you see a shooting star crossing the sky, it always looks closer than it actually is. And people often report a shooting star, a very bright one, we call it a fireball if it's brighter than any of the stars. They often report one of these really brilliant meteors as being a crashing aircraft, not just in the case of Rendlesham, but many other times as well.
Had these trained airmen mistaken the fireball meteor for a falling aircraft? Or had something actually come down in the forest?
It could, of course, be that something was jettisoned at altitude which came down in the forest. But we have no wreckage to show. In terms of hard evidence, what we need is wreckage, and wreckage that we can take away and analyse somewhere.
For some, there are problems. The lack of hard evidence, and the years that have passed since the witnesses made their original statements.
I just think the story now, it's been going for so long, every time those airmen tell the story, they're embellishing it a little bit more. They're on the lecture circuit, they're featured in books and articles. They've become part of the UFO industry.
30 years on, Rendlesham continues to fascinate UFO enthusiasts. Their curiosity prompted former MOD official Nick Pope to reinvestigate the case.
When I was investigating UFOs for the Ministry of Defence in the early 90s, I was still getting questions about Rendlesham Forest. It was the single case on which the media and the public were most likely to contact me. So I decided on that basis that firstly I should pull the files out of archives and see what we knew. And secondly, once I'd done that, do what the police would call a cold case review. What I was going to do was retrospectively investigate the case and see if we'd missed anything.
Pope's interest in the case endures to this day. Decades after the original event, his research has persuaded a previously unknown witness to come forward. Nigel Kerr was in front of a radar screen that night. This is the first time he has given a television interview about what he saw.
Because it was the Christmas period and the New Year period, it was very, very quiet. And round about midnight, we received a call from the Bentwaters Command Post. They'd seen bright lights, roughly at an altitude of between 500 and 1,000 feet, they thought. And they wanted to know whether we could see anything on radar which might correlate with that.
Kerr was responsible for controlling military aircraft movements across the region. Yet his standard radar was picking up nothing unusual. However, he could also access Britain's most powerful radar equipment, the nation's air defense radar network at RAF Neatishead.
We switched to the Neatishead radar. Sure enough, we got a radar contact from the Neatishead radar. We let it go for a couple of sweeps. It was still there. On the third sweep, it disappeared. On the fourth sweep, it returned, and then after that, we didn't see it again.
The MOD recorded no abnormal activity over that Christmas period, but this account does suggest an unknown object flew over Suffolk that night. But could the radar be wrong?
The radar is not infallible. There are items such as weather balloons. Weather balloons can be seen on radar quite easily. Also, you can have a flock of birds. A flock of birds would appear on radar, perhaps one or two sweeps, but then would disappear again. But in this particular case, we had a good, solid return at the location that Bentwaters inquired about. It wasn't until about maybe a year later when it was reported nationally in the press. And it suddenly occurred to me at that stage, this is maybe what Bentwaters were actually talking about that night.
Kerr's radar report adds weight to Jim and John's extraordinary account. But the Rendlesham incident was far from over. Just 2 nights later, the mysterious lights were back.
Here he comes from the south. He's coming toward us now.
December the 26th, 1980. US airmen encounter mysterious lights and what one describes as a landed craft in Rendlesham Forest, England. Rumors of the UFO sighting spread through a high-security US airbase. The authorities are skeptical, but 2 nights later, the mysterious lights appear once again.
Strange lights in the sky. Here he comes from the south. He's coming toward us now.
And the eyewitness this time, a high-ranking lieutenant colonel.
Colonel Holt went out into the forest to debunk this UFO nonsense and actually ended up having his own encounter.
The incident burned such an impact in my memory that I don't think I'll ever be able to forget it.
There have been differing accounts of what happened next. Some suggest that Holt is confused about his dates, but he is adamant he remembers the event with crystal clarity.
We were having the end-of-the-year Christmas party. We just finished the main course when the on-duty police lieutenant came in and insisted on seeing myself and the base commander and talking to us privately. He was white as a sheet. And he said, "It's back." And we both looked at each other and said, "What's back?" He said, "The UFO."
What is not disputed is that Holt heads into Rendlesham Forest, determined to debunk the UFO mystery.
I was very skeptical. I was sure there was a logical explanation. When we arrived there were 20 or 30 people milling around. They could see a bright area where this alleged landing had taken place.
Holt follows the glowing light to the exact spot where just 48 hours earlier, a UFO was supposedly sighted.
I'd taken my small microcassette recorder along that I normally carried with me around the base, and it recorded certain instances of what happened, so I did have it documented pretty well.
The tape recording that Holt made that night still survives.
150 feet or more from the initial, I should say, suspected impact point. We found a small blast, what looks like a blasted or scrubbed up area here. It is looking directly overhead. One can see an opening in the trees, plus some freshly broken pine branches on the ground underneath. Looks like someone came off about 15 to 20 feet up.
UFO investigator Gary Heseltine has come to Rendlesham Forest to explore Holt's account of the night.
Where the object had landed, it had actually punched its way through the canopy of trees. And as it had come down, it had broken off several branches. They also found a blast area in the middle of the triangle, which may account for the fact that when the object took off, there may be some kind of propulsion used.
As the team explores the area, a bright light appears, moving through the trees.
And they see this red, winking object, and it's moving.
We stood there in awe for several minutes and watched it. A bright red light was moving through the trees. It appeared like an eye, like it was blinking. We decided to approach it, and it receded. It moved away from us.
Following the strange lights, they emerge into an open field. The unidentified phenomenon is in clear sight.
There's some type of strange flashing red light ahead. There's yellow. I saw a yellow tinge in it too, coming this way. It is definitely coming this way. There is no doubt about it. This is weird.
Suddenly, two more lights appear in the sky.
About 10 degrees horizon directly north, we've got two strange objects dancing about with colored lights on them.
We just stood there in awe. Thoughts were running through my mind. Is this some type of hostile activity? Is it an attempt to communicate? Is it a warning? And just as suddenly as it appeared, it disappeared, just like a light switch. Click, it was gone.
Holt wrote an official report of the night to his base commander, handing over his tape recorder as evidence.
Colonel Holt's original memo to the Ministry of Defence was the formal notification to the British government that this incident had taken place. Colonel Holt is probably one of the most senior military officers to have seen and made an official report of a UFO whilst on duty.
Holt's status as deputy commander of the base and his conversion from skeptic to believer seem to make a compelling case. But not everyone there that night agrees. Holt's commanding officer was outside the base, but did not see any unusual lights in the sky. Others feel there may be a more earthly source for the light. Orfordness Lighthouse.
Holt made a running tape recording of what he could see at the time. If you play that tape and watch the lighthouse, the description where they're seeing the light, there it is again, out at the coast. It fits perfectly with the flashing beam of the Orfordness Lighthouse.
This looks like it's clear after the coast. It's right on the horizon. Moves about a bit and flashes from time to time.
Orfordness, with its 5 million candela bulb, lies 8 kilometers southeast of Rendlesham Forest. But Holt is adamant this is not what he saw.
I hear that you guys were looking at the lighthouse one more time, I'm going to scream. We saw the object over there, The lighthouse is over there. We could see the lighthouse.
He's describing objects to the north, multiple objects to the north, objects to the south. So clearly we're describing something that is moving in the sky. The Orford Ness Lighthouse is way off in that distance. Now, I defy anybody to try to tell me that a flying lighthouse exists.
Holt's report also describes other UFOs he saw in the sky at the same time. Where did these multiple lights originate? Nigel Henbest has an intriguing suggestion.
As an astronomer, I would say the lights that seem to hover and twinkle like stars actually were stars. The brilliant star Sirius, the brightest star in the sky, was visible that night and in exactly the direction that the brightest of these lights was reported as being. It was described as twinkling in different colours. That's how Sirius looks.
Henbest believes Sirius may also account for Holt's reported movement of the UFO.
The report also said that this bright light gradually sank down, and checking where Sirius was in the sky and the time of night, that's exactly what Sirius would have done. So this is actually, to my mind as an astronomer, a very accurate report of the star Sirius.
Around 20% of UFO sightings are attributed to astronomical events. To this day, the case remains controversial. No single theory explains all the events described in Holt's memo.
Whether it was a lighthouse or a bright star, at the time they saw it, whatever it was an unidentified flying object.
Clearly, Holt and his team encountered something unusual that they weren't able to explain. Quite what they encountered, I don't know, and the Ministry of Defence doesn't know either. This UFO incident was and remains unexplained.
Venice, August the 17th, 1936. An extraordinary sighting of 3 unidentified flying objects sends the Italian Air Force into a state of panic.
Improvvisamente sono partiti 2 caccia intercettatori e hanno cercato di avvicinarsi a questo oggetto, solo che sia l'oggetto lungo che i 2 oggetti più piccoli sono schizzati via a una velocità incredibile.
60 years later, mysterious documents now reveal the event and the government cover-up that followed.
It was a personal order by Mussolini not to speak about this.
A secret UFO research group was founded, headed by the Italian dictator.
If this is genuine, one can see why Mussolini would be interested.
Roberto Pinotti is a top Italian ufologist and director of Italy's largest UFO research center. He spent almost half a century studying UFO reports. In 1996, an anonymous package arrives at Pinotti's office. The documents within purported to be a secret government report of the UFO sighting.
These documents were very intriguing because they are related to a definite report dated the 22nd of August of 1936 about a sighting over Mestre and Venice.
The report contained detailed descriptions and sketches of the UFO. Pinotti and his colleague Alfredo Lissoni believe the report is genuine.
Era il pieno giorno, in piena luce, quando improvvisamente nel cielo di Venezia, ma anche della vicina città di Mestre, compare un oggetto strano, un fuso volante, un oggetto a forma di sigaro con tanti finestrini.
The huge craft hovers over the Venetian skyline. The files record the witnesses' detailed observations.
It had different portholes. In fact, we see at least 4 portholes along his surface. And the object leaves a sort of smoke behind him.
Suddenly, the UFO opens up at one end, releasing 2 smaller objects from within.
The report describes the 2 objects near the cigar-shaped object like metallic, Saturn-shaped objects.
With 3 unknown craft now in the sky, the Italian military rapidly responds.
The Italian Air Force was alerted. In fact, 2 fighters were scrambled in order to intercept this unknown object.
Ma improvvisamente sia il fuso volante che le 2 sfere schizzano via a velocità rapidissima.
What could the objects have been? Skeptics suggest a misidentified airship. In 1936, Zeppelins are the most common form of air transport across the Atlantic. Airships, like the Zeppelin, have a cigar-like shape and fuel engines that would explain the object's trail of smoke. But Lassoni is not convinced.
Sicuramente l'oggetto visto su Venezia non era un dirigibile Zeppelin, perché gli italiani conoscevano molto bene questo modello. Inoltre il dirigibile Zeppelin non era in grado di portare al suo interno dei velivoli più piccoli.
According to these documents, whatever was in the sky that day had a lasting effect on the fascist dictator. He tries to silence all key witnesses.
I testimoni vengono fermati dalla polizia politica di Mussolini, l'Ovra, vengono portati 6 giorni dopo a Roma, vengono interrogati, vengono stilati dei rapporti, dei verbali ed è stato loro intimato di non parlarne con nessuno, altrimenti sarebbero stati rinchiusi in manicomio.
But what would Mussolini have been so afraid of people knowing? Former MOD official Nick Pope believes the political timing of the sighting may hold a clue.
I think it's important to look at these Mussolini UFO files with a sort of contemporary context in mind. It's a very different era. This is the run-up to the Second World War. During the war, of course, the feelings of dread and panic and paranoia. One has to ask, does any of this play a role in these UFO sightings and indeed in the UFO phenomenon more generally?
Mussolini thought that the so-called unconventional flying vehicles, because this is the correct term the fascists used, were just a new kind of weapon of another European country, England, France, or Germany. And as far as we know, he suspected these objects were built by the Germans.
Suspicion that Germany was developing a revolutionary new technology was widespread throughout Europe.
There are many rumors that during the war the Nazis developed flying saucer technology. You hear a lot about Nazi flying saucers. If this is genuine, again, one can see why Mussolini would be interested, because I think one of the comments is, well, if this represents the state of aerospace technology, then we, the Italian Air Force, need to go back to the drawing board.
According to Pinotti, that is exactly what Mussolini tries to do. He sets up a top-secret research group to study these velivoli non convenzionali, or unconventional aircraft.
This group was Cabinet RS-33. RS are the initials, the capital letter of Ricerche Speciali, special researchers.
Italy's leading scientists, engineers, and astronomers are assembled to design new flying technology based on witness descriptions of the Venetian UFO.
Mussolini had ordered them to try to copy these new objects. Normally, airplanes are elongated with wings, flaps, and so on. The technology they tried to develop, on the contrary, was about entubed wings, rotating wings. In other words, they tried to develop round planes, round objects.
If the case is genuine, the Italian government's involvement gives it a unique place in history as the world's first ever official UFO sighting. Until now, ufology was generally accepted to have started in the late 1940s with events like Roswell.
The Mussolini UFO files are very interesting because if this turns out to be genuine, it effectively rewrites the whole history of the modern UFO phenomenon. The modern flying saucer mystery really starts in 1947. So if Mussolini was taking an interest in all this back in the 30s, really we need to revisit the entire history of this.
It's an extraordinary story. But is it actually true? British-born author and UFO investigator Mark Pilkington has come to Venice to explore the evidence.
Behind me over here is Mestre to the north, and this is where, according to Pignotti's documents, the UFO sighting took place. And at that time, Mestre was a quiet residential town.
Pilkington has been studying the documents that supposedly recorded what happened here in 1936.
So I've brought copies of the original Pignotti documents here to Venice to try to get a feel for the case, for the account that's described within them. But the problem for me is I just can't get past the documents themselves. I'm just not convinced that they're authentic. Even the most careful UFO researcher can fall victim to a cleverly perpetrated hoax.
But Pinotti and Lassoni have already considered this.
Quando nel 1996 abbiamo ricevuto i primi documenti, abbiamo pensato a uno scherzo molto elaborato, ma per curiosità abbiamo voluto verificare lo stesso.
And so we had a forensic analysis. This means that we had the paper analyzed, the ink analyzed, and in fact the forensic analysis proved that everything was real.
But for Pilkington, there are still unanswered questions.
The thing that makes me most suspicious about the documents is the timing and the manner of their arrival. They were handed anonymously to Pignotti, so he has no means by which to check out their source. And perhaps most revealingly, the timing of their arrival in 1996 is the point at which globally there was more interest in the UFO subject than there had been for perhaps 20 years. So this is the time of the X-Files, the alleged autopsy of the aliens from the Roswell crash. So somebody could see that people all around the world were fascinated by the UFO subject, and indeed other people were making a great deal of money from it.
No reference to the sighting or a secret UFO research group has been found in any Italian or international archive. The entire case rests on the validity of Pinotti's anonymous files.
Pignotti himself is absolutely convinced of their authenticity and claims to have shown them to a materials archivist who has verified them as being of the correct time period. However, there are others within the Italian UFO community who are not so convinced.
Adding to Pilkington's suspicions, Pinotti is reluctant to allow any further analysis of the documents.
Documents which have the potential to rewrite history should be studied by a number of independent analysts, not just by one person.
There is huge controversy about this. If this is a hoax, it is clearly a clever and very well constructed hoax. My own view on this, I'm undecided.
The whole package, the idea of a clandestine Mussolini-era Italian UFO research group is wonderfully exciting, evocative, and romantic, and would make for a great science fiction film, certainly one that I'd like to see. However, in truth, there's very little here to suggest that these are anything other than well-crafted forgeries.
Central Sweden, 15th of September 1952. At 11:30 p.m., a young office clerk and his mother witnessed 2 UFOs hovering in the skies above their home. The sighting triggers a full investigation by the Swedish Defense Ministry and became one of the most famous UFO cases in the country's history. Klaus Svan is a journalist and vice chairman of AFU, one of the world's largest UFO archives. He has spent many years analyzing the government files.
This picture, taken by Nils Frost outside Mora in the south central of Sweden, is probably the most scrutinized Swedish UFO picture ever, and a very interesting one, since the military couldn't identify it.
"20-year-old Nils Frost is returning home after visiting his girlfriend nearby.
And when he came home, he was just going to go into his house where his mother was sleeping. But then he took a look around and saw that there was some strange light in the northwest horizon somewhere. And he really didn't understand what he saw.
Stunned by the 2 mysterious objects, Frost rushes inside to wake his parents, dragging his mother out to see it.
Quick! It's there! So they were standing there together, looking at this very strange light, moving a little slowly in the heavens. And they also saw another light coming up behind this first big light. And he thought it was around 15 centimeters wide. That's a very big angle in the heavens, if it really means 15 centimeters on an arm length distance. It's illuminating the clouds in a way so that you can see it's a very strong source of light.
This strange incident might never have been taken seriously by the government, but Nils Frost had his camera with him that night.
He took 2 pictures of this very strange light. You can see also another light coming up there underneath. And on the picture, you can see the line of trees here, and the object is just above the trees.
These mysterious images have baffled researchers for decades. Dr. Eva Bernhardsdotter is a researcher at the Swedish Defense Agency. She knows how seriously the case was taken by the military.
The Swedish Armed Forces contacted a number of people in order to investigate the source of this phenomenon. A very prominent scientist had looked at these pictures, and they said it's impossible to identify the light source. The larger object that was being observed had to be very intense, much stronger than the light that you would expect from the moon, for example. It gave light so intense that it probably ruined the film.
They saw that the negative was so overexposed in the middle of the picture, it nearly burnt the negative.
But photography expert Paul Ellis is not convinced that the UFO's light source damaged the negative.
I think it's really unlikely that a light source would be so bright that it could actually damage a roll of film. I've been to the Arctic Circle, and you do get to see some very strange lights in the sky. Not just the northern lights, but some other very unusual lights.
So what is this powerful glowing light? One theory investigated by the military at the time is the elusive phenomenon ball lightning.
Well, ball lightning is a very mysterious phenomena. Many people have reported it over the centuries, many scientists, and it's described as a ball of glowing light, red, yellow, perhaps blue or white in colour, an electrical glowing ball of light. It's anywhere from just a few centimetres in diameter to perhaps a metre.
Is this what Niels Frost saw? The Swedish Defence Ministry approaches physicist Hannes Alfvén, who later won a Nobel Prize, for an expert opinion.
Professor Alfvén told the military that it was no kind of ball lightning, which was his expertise. So they ruled out ball lightning, which of course I don't think it was either, because they were too long up in the sky and they didn't really look like ball lightning.
Professor Alfvén concludes that the light phenomenon does not resemble anything that we have seen or experienced before. Next, the investigation turns to the witness himself. Could this have been an elaborate hoax? Klaus Svann interviewed Niels Frost in the 1980s before he died.
When I did my interview with Niels Frost in 1987, he came across as a very nice and very a little shy man that didn't want to have his name in the papers. I never thought that Niels Frost was trying to hoax anyone, because bringing out his mother made hoaxing very difficult, of course.
So what did Frost photograph on that cold September night? One final theory suggests objects that are not from this world.
The average person really isn't used to seeing planets in the sky. Now, if you're not an astronomer yourself, and maybe you're in a lonely place on a mountain or out in the woods or forest or on a lake, way away from anywhere, and you see a brilliant light in the sky that you're not expecting because we're not used to seeing planets, then I think you'll be awed by it. I think you'd also be rather frightened.
Following the sighting, people investigated whether Frost had observed an alignment of the moon and the planet Jupiter.
There's a good reason why people in northern countries like Sweden or Norway might mistake planets for UFOs more often than in southern countries. The planets appear to go around a band in the sky. The further north you are, the lower down in the sky that band is, so the planets will seem to hug the horizon. And that's when people notice them. Very few people look overhead and see what's directly above them. You do notice what's around the horizon. And it's things around the horizon, bright lights near the horizon, that you could mistake for a UFO.
But in 1952, the experts are not convinced.
The Stockholm Observatory has concluded that this cannot be the case of any astronomical phenomenon.
But is the observatory mistaken? Klaus Svann digs a little deeper.
And I tried to look a little broader. I also looked before and after the date that it was said to have been taken. And it turned out that just a week before, you can see that the moon and the planet Jupiter were at exactly this spot in the heavens.
The new star map shows that 8 days before the sighting, the moon and Jupiter would have been low and large in the night sky.
If you compare the pictures that Niels Frost took with the star map from September the 7th, 1952, you could see that it is probably the moon and the Jupiter, the planet Jupiter that we're talking about.
Sometimes the witnesses give the wrong date, sometimes even the wrong time. So my suspicion here was that the photographs were actually taken a week earlier.
But Niels Frost stuck to his story. The mystery of Sweden's most iconic UFO photograph endures to this day.
If it was taken a week before, it is the moon and the planet Jupiter. If it was taken on the September the 15th, I have no idea. then it is something completely different.
This is the largest UFO wave we've had in Pennsylvania in 35 years.
What's going on in Bucks County? Total mayhem.
If that was a plane, it would have fell right out of the sky.
You want to find that wow image, the one that's going to say, look, we've got them, they're here.
Did he saw a very, very unusual phenomenon.
If we can validate the story, what we have is an unidentified object in that airspace.
UFOs exist. What is not certain is what they are. The Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON, watches the skies, investigating sightings soon after they occur. Their investigators use the tools of science, psychology, and law enforcement to get as close to the truth as the truth will allow. Unidentified flying objects definitely exist. Only their identity remains a mystery. The mystery of UFOs over Earth.
I'm excited. I'm excited that they're coming. I'm excited they're at my back door. I am waiting to see what the culmination of all this is. It, to me, is something that is at the forefront of a breakthrough.
When they're talking about a flap, essentially what you have is the occurrence of a number of sightings in a fairly short period of time in a given geographic location.
Most UFO sightings occur with an individual. They happen, then they're gone. Once in a while, you get a mass sighting. In 1997, was seen by the governor of Arizona. But flaps are rare because they can last for days and sometimes months.
And then one day, just as quick as it starts, it stops again. And nobody knows why. So you want to take advantage of it. You want to look into it as quickly as possible.
This is the largest UFO wave we've had in Pennsylvania in 35 years. We normally get 8 to 10 sightings a month. We get 63 reports in July. There were 25 more in August, 32 more in September. Why all of a sudden is Pennsylvania seeing all of this? Something's going on.
Even though there are different days and different times, we're seeing a description of some very common objects.
The activity that we're looking at right now is about 7 times more than the usual. We put together all our information so that we have a map of all the sightings. A lot of people have reported different objects, and it's interesting to note that these objects vary from a cylinder-shaped object to a boomerang to a spear.
All it was a white ball of light. So I ran inside and I grabbed my astronomer binoculars and I honed right in on that son of a gun, and there was no structural features at all. It was just a white, pure ball of light.
I've only been investigating for MUFON 4 months now. I'm out here to figure out what the hell's going on out there.
It was ball-shaped, kind of.